Hi everyone and welcome to another Figma prototyping tutorial. In today's video we're going to take a look at creating a share button with micro interactions. Here's the final result. As usual, if you'd like to save time and support the channel, you can download the source file by clicking the link below that will take you to my store. And now let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is use the text tool to create the share text. So I'm going to press T on my keyboard and then click once and start typing. I'm going to type in share, and also I'm going to press Shift 2 with this text selected to zoom to selection. And then over here in the text panel, I'm going to change the font. I think we could do like some very frequently used font, let's say Roboto. So let's go for Roboto semi-bold or medium. Whatever, we can change this later anyway, and then also change the font size to, let's say, 16. Again, Shift 2, zoom to selection. Next thing I'm going to do is create an auto layout around this, which means selecting this text and then press Shift A to add an auto layout. This will create an auto layout around this text. I'm going to press Command R and then rename this auto layout to share button. And I'm going to also change the padding. So for horizontal padding, I'm going to go for 16, and vertical, I think I'm going to go for 10 or 8, something around that area. I'm going to also, still with this auto layout selected, I'm going to go over here to fill and add fill so that we get a background color of the button. And I think I'm going to go for some kind of blue. Let's choose a nice blue color that will be pleasant to look at and inviting for interaction. So let's do like this, something like this. You can of course choose your own color, doesn't matter, totally up to you. But then I'm gonna go over here to the frame section and increase the corner rounding to about 24. It doesn't really matter once you actually get beyond a threshold that has where you get fully rounded corners. It doesn't really matter what value you put in, so I'm going to go for like 24. And also I'm going to click on the text and then change the color to white. So this is what we get a nice rounded rectangle with a text inside that says share. Of course, there's going to be an icon, which means I will be creating the icon as a separate component. That means, first of all, frame tool, where I will create a frame that will be approximately 16 by 16 pixels, points, and then rename this frame to icon, or just let's say share icon, right? And what I'm going to do now is move that share icon frame over here and turn this into a component. Let's try and use as much keyboard shortcuts as possible, which means Option Command K, or also Alt Control K if you're on Windows. So Option Command K, and we have created a share icon component. Now we need to use an instance of this component, which means going to Assets and then searching for share icon in this section. It's right here. I'm going to click and drag that over here inside the auto layout. We have now added this instance of the share icon into our auto layout. I will also select the share button auto layout and make sure the alignment is left but center, right? So that the icon is equidistant from the top and from the bottom. Here you can see how it's being affected, right? So you want to go for either left center, center or right center, doesn't really matter. I think we're going to also adjust the spacing to 6 and then also add a bit of padding actually, just to, you know, make this look spacey and overall pleasant to interact with. All right, now what's the next step? I think we could start outlining the basic share icon, which means going to the rectangle tool by pressing R, and then I'm going to create a rectangle inside the share icon component. As you can see, of course, based on how components and instances work, it gets updated right here. If you'd like to learn more about components and instances, make sure to go and check out my channel. I already did a tutorial on components and instances, which is very important to understand if you want to build scalable UIs and projects in Figma, so definitely important to know about components and instances. All right, so this rectangle is gonna have a stroke. I think we're gonna go for 2 points. It's gonna be centered like this. Then with this rectangle still selected, I'm gonna remove the fill, press enter on my keyboard, and then click this top line right here, right? I click the top line, it turns blue as you can see, and then I'm gonna simply remove it, which will create this U-shaped path, right? I'm gonna extend that all the way to the edges. I don't know if that's visible, but let me just darken the background so you can see where the share icon ends. So the white area is the share icon area. As you can see, it's being reflected right here. Also, I think I will hide the fill for now and turn the stroke to white, because we are, after all, designing for a blue background, so I think white works best for this specific color. What I want to do next is select this rectangle one and do some corner rounding, right? To soften this shape with a 3-point corner rounding radius. Here you can see the final result. I think we also could try and adding the arrow, which is Shift L to add an arrow. I'm gonna click inside this share icon frame, and then I think I'm gonna reduce the size of this arrow. As you can see, I think this is too large for our purposes. I think we're gonna have to create our own arrow, which means using the pen tool, P, and then I will click once, click here, and then click here, over here, right, to get a 90-degree angle arrow. Then also do 2 points stroke width, 8 on width and 4 on height, or 3 maybe. I will also go for round endings, right? Or maybe actually let's keep it at none, it's sharp, right? I'm gonna center this shape by pressing Option H to make sure it's equally distant from the left and right edges, and then I'm gonna maybe play around with the size, maybe 10 by 4, move towards the top. I think we also need to select the overall share icon component and disable clip content, right? So that it doesn't cut out this very top of the arrow, right? So disable clip content. Awesome. So now I'm again gonna change this to white so that it matches this button. And I will also use the pen tool again to create a simple line to complete this arrow. I'm also gonna turn that to white, and let's see what the final result looks like. I think this is good. I think we could do a little bit of, we could make the U shape slightly more narrow, maybe move it a little bit towards the top. I think this is very bottom heavy. So let's try and adjust that. I'm gonna select this U shape directly by pressing Command and clicking, and then just using my mouse to scale this down like this, right? I think this is a step in the right direction. I think we also should increase the height to about 6, which will reduce this icon. Yeah, I think this works. I think we could increase the font weight so that the weight of the font, right, this line, this thickness of these lines are approximately the same as the lines of the icon. Matching these values will produce a button that looks consistent, will produce a design that simply looks good, because with different line width, for example, let's try and do like 1, this looks kind of unbalanced. So anytime you do a design where you have some kind of lines, make sure that these are the same weight, or at least very, very similar, because it simply looks better, right? As you can see. What I'm gonna do now is select these 2 vectors and group them to create an arrow. Select the group, Command R, rename this arrow, and I will actually name this arrow arrow 1, because there's going to be 2 of those. Duplicate this group, which will automatically rename this to arrow 2, and I'm gonna move the second one below the first one, right? Below the frame actually. So as you can see, it's contained within the frame, but it is outside the frame, and which means if we checked clip content, this arrow will get hidden. So the second arrow is kind of outside the frame, but not really, right? If you are confused by this, make sure to also check out my channel where I created a video on frames and groups, which will hopefully provide more clarity onto how these things work. So if you're confused by what I just did, make sure to go and check out that video. And now we are ready for creating variants, right? So first of all, I'm gonna hide this arrow number 2. I'm gonna set the opacity to 0, right? So it looks as if it's not there, but it is, it still is, right? Then what I will do next is create a variant, and this variant is gonna be called hover, right? We're gonna have probably 4 states of the button: default, hover, pressed, and finished, and these icons need to reflect that fact. So I'm gonna add auto layout, stack them next to each other. We have the hover, and in the hover state, I think what we could do is move this arrow a little bit upwards, right? Like this. Select this line, and this line will be moved, the end of the line will be moved to the same position as here, which means that the goal is when you hover over the button, the line will animate, the arrow will extend upwards, right? That's the intention. Then I will create another variant, where the variant, this one will be called press, and what I intend to do here is create an animation that feels as if you spring load the arrow, right? You press it down, as if it's some kind of a spring, and then when you release it, it's gonna jump away and the second one is gonna appear. So let me just actually again select this vector 2 under arrow 1, and I'm gonna move this all the way over here to make it really short. Press enter, and then this arrow is going to be moved to about here, right? So that's when you press the arrow down to later be released. I'm going to also move that arrow a bit upwards, and I think, yeah, I'm going to also make sure the property is called icon state. We have default, hover, pressed, and what's missing is the last one, which is finished, and I'm gonna create another variant, and this icon state is gonna be called finished. And then what this means is selecting this line, adding a bit of length, then selecting this arrow and then moving that arrow over here, like to really move it outside the frame. And at the same time, I'm gonna move the second arrow in, set the opacity to 100, and then kind of make sure it's in the same position as this arrow, which means this basically, right? I think that's identical. So what's gonna happen here is, ideally I'd like to do a smart animation where this arrow flies out and then the second one will fade in at the same time, which also means I'm gonna select the arrow 1 in the last state, in the last variant, and set that opacity to 0, right? So the goal here is for these 2 variants to look identical, which is the case right now, I think. So the icon is finished. Let's focus on the button now. The button is also going to be a component, right? So I'm gonna select the button and press Option Command K or Alt Control K if you're on Windows, and turn this into a component. I will add a variant. This second variant is going to be called hover, right? Also, I'm going to select the whole component, and then under properties, I'm going to edit this property to be called button state. Button state, right? And we're going to have 4 of those. We have the default, we have the hover, we have the pressed, and we have the finished, right? To match these. In the hover state, we want to use the hover icon state, right? So when you hover over this button, you get this state of the icon, right? Makes sense. When you press this button down, you want to choose the pressed icon state, right? Which is this state. And then finally, in the finished state, you want to use the finished icon state. It looks the same as the first one, but as you can see, the arrow 2 is visible while the arrow 1 is not, while in the first state, that's not the case. The arrow 2 is invisible and the arrow 1 is visible, right? So there's a big difference. Now, we actually need to do 2 more things before we are done with this. And that would be 1, editing the appearance of the button based on states, and then setting up the interaction. And we're going to do the first thing right now. I'm going to select the hover state and go to effects to create a drop shadow. I'm going to sample the color of the drop shadow from the button background, right? Like this. I'm gonna set up some blur. I think it's gonna be very significant, like 24, and then some Y coordinates. I'm gonna set that to around 12, maybe a bit more for the blurring, and reduce the opacity of the shadow to make it a bit softer, right? Also, this will mean changing the button color. Let's say that it's gonna lighten up a little bit. I think we're gonna go for a color that is slightly lighter, like this. Yeah, I think this works. And then with the pressed button, we want to go in the opposite direction, which means using a darker color, right? So I'm using the HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. Set up under color, and that's where I edit the button appearance. And now, I think this is good to go in terms of a button appearance. There might be some final changes, but now let's do the second thing that remains, which is setting up the interaction. I'm gonna switch over to prototype mode, which I can also do by pressing Option or Alt 8, I think, or no, 9. So Option 9 or Alt 9 to switch over to prototype, and then click the first variant of the button, connect that to the second variant, and say, while hovering, change to button state hover, right? Makes sense. This is gonna be Smart Animate, and it's gonna be quite quick, actually. I think we could go for 70 milliseconds. And then from the hover state, you want to, there are two options, right? From the hover state, you can go back to the first state, which just means really, moving outside the button. But then you can also go to the pressed state, right? You want to connect the second variant to the third variant and say, while pressing. While pressing, change to button state pressed, and then this is going to be also Smart Animate, ease out, and I think we could also do like something a bit longer, so let's say 110 milliseconds. And finally, when you select the pressed state, you want to connect that to the last state and go for mouse up, right? Mouse up, change to button state finished, also Smart Animate, and I think this also could take like 110 milliseconds. It's important that you use Smart Animate everywhere. And then what you want to do finally is connect the last variant to the very first variant and say mouse leave. So when the mouse actually leaves the final state, it's gonna revert back to the initial state, and the change in this specific case is going to be instant. Now let's use a frame tool to create a test frame. That's going to be 1000 by 600. I'm going to also rename this to test frame, and let's see what we built. Let's see if this works and maybe do any changes necessary. So assets, share button, and drop that right here, center that, and launch the prototype. And this is what we get. We get a share button that when you hover over it, you can see the icon being animated like this. Then when you press down and hold it pressed down, you spring load the arrow and then you release, and you can see it flies out and the second arrow flies in. I think this is very good. I think this is a good result. I think the only change we need to do right now is slow down the hover state, I think, right? I think we could do like slightly longer interaction there, and then especially with the last animation where it flies out, I think that could be significantly slower. So let's go to the share button under prototype, and then with the hover state while hovering, I think that could take like 150 milliseconds, while the very last animation, mouse up, could take like 300 milliseconds, right? Let's go back to our prototype. I think I'm gonna make this slightly bigger. I think I'm gonna also increase the size of this by using the key tool and scale it up like this. I'm gonna probably use 2x size, center that, and reset, and let's try again. And this is what we get now. Again, hover. I think this is better. I think I like this one more than the previous version. When I press it down and hold press down, it spring loads like this, and then when I release, an animation happens where the arrow flies in and then it reverts back to its initial state. Right now I think the last animation is too slow actually, so let's, instead of 300, let's do 200. Let's test that out. Let's see if that helps. And yeah, I think this is better. I think the 200 milliseconds look better than 300. So this is it. This is the final result. I hover, I press it down, release, and you can see this animation happening. And then I can repeat the process. I can basically do it all over again. And you get a nice share button with an animated icon and micro interactions. So this is it. If this video helped you, I'd appreciate you leaving a like. And of course, if you'd like to download this button and use this interactive component in your own project, make sure to check the link in the description. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.